Welcome to Decoding Healthcare Research. I'm your host, Efrain Riveros, Dr. E.F. Rain. Today, we are going to continue talking about aging, the aging process, and the multifactorial nature of this process of aging. To discuss this topic, we invited Dr. Tamas Fulop. He's a professor of medicine and geriatrics at the University of Sherbrooke, Canada, and he's one of the world-renowned experts in the topic. So I want to welcome you, Dr. Fulop. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. So let's start with a little bit of background. So aging has been a concern for humanity forever. So it's a very complex topic, and the mechanisms entail a lot of intricacies that have been difficult to understand. In the last few decades, some groundbreaking papers have shed light about the mechanisms that underlie aging. So my first question to you is what has changed in the understanding of the aging process over the last 2 or 3 decades compared to the past century?
This is a very interesting question. And, we in the field of aging, we are always trying to solve what is aging and trying to find something which is more inclusive than exclusive. So there are about 300 theories which exist to define aging, and all of them like just one aspect of aging, and very few of them are inclusive and trying to look to aging in its complexity. And I think this is one of the most important notion that we had during these 2 or 3 last decades to understand that the reductionist way to understand aging by one theory to the other, like for example, we had the free radical theory of Denhan Harman that he announced in 1953-56, that we know actually that it's not exactly a cause of aging, but it can be integrated in many other causes or underlying mechanism of aging. The same is, with the theory of programmed aging, which was announced by Hayflick with the replicative senescence theory, what was based on the shortening of the telomere. And this was for a long time so that this will solve the whole program and the whole understanding of aging. But we know actually that these are just one aspect. So if you think about actually in the complexity, we know that the complex adaptive systems are very different from what we were thinking on aging before in a reductionist way. The complex adaptive system thinking is that the system is composed of many elements. These elements are interacting and forming a higher element, which will again form a higher element, and all of them will result in some common phenotype like aging. And these are not only from the bottom up, but from the top down. So, and they interact each other. And one of the most important knowledge that we gain from that is the notion of emergence. That means that even if you have many complementary and interacting mechanisms, the final product cannot be foreseen for sure from all these interactions. Not like all the aging theories actually are considering aging as a detrimental phenomenon. And this is very important to understand, that aging is not a detrimental phenomenon. It's just a process which is, in an evolutionary perspective, is an adaptive mechanism.
And it's very interesting to consider the aging process under that lens, because traditionally aging has been thought of something that happens inside you. The environment was not even considered. It was something that you were doomed to end up having. And that was the result of different processes that the different theories try to explain. And as you mentioned, the unidimensional approach to aging is really incomplete. And you mentioned as well in your paper that the interaction between the individual and the environment and the way in evolution we have to adapt to those environments, that interaction in itself has to be managed by the organism, right? And that entails different processes that go changing over time as you get old. So I guess that my question is, how do you find the interaction or the intersection between the environment and the individual, and how they play together in the process of aging?
Actually, and since some time, we know that aging, the determinant of aging is only 25% for the genetic background. 75% of aging is environmental. Environmental is very large. And environment means adaptation, means stress, means different way and different processes which are interacting. And of course, this is also the basis of what we call the personalized aging, as somebody in the same environment can really be as a successful aging, or can be an unhealthy pathological aging. The genetic background is just a possibility that we get at the beginning of our life, at birth. And what we are doing with this genetic background will be really determined what we call, most specifically in immunity, the immunobiography. And what we call more largely is the envirobiography. The envirobiography and the immunobiography is a long time-related process, which means that during your life, during life, which is the definition of time indeed, you have several input from everywhere where you are, from what you eat, what you exercise, what you get as a disease, what you get as an infection, what you get from social aspects, whether you have good life conditions, bad life conditions, the economical situations, also the different aggressions that you are getting during your life. So all these things are converging on your system, which tries all the time managing and trying to keep a homeostasis to maintain your functionality. And this is very important, that the functionality will not be the same when you are young or old. And this should not be compared always an older subject functioning to how a younger subject is functioning, because the envirobiography was not the same. They never get the same, and they will never get the same inputs from outside. And this is determining how you will age. And even if you age, you can perform very well, because this is not a detrimental phenomenon, but an adaptive phenomenon to everything that you can get. of course, we should mention that the adaptation can be also maladaptation. So this is making that you are individually very different from one person to the other. And what is characterizing aging above all this phenomenon is heterogeneity.
Yeah, and it's clear that the immune system is playing a critical role here, right? So as the immune system is central when it comes to response to stressors, right? And I think the first approach that Dr. Franceschi in 2000 expressed with his groundbreaking paper, Inflammaging an Evolutionary Perspective on Immunosenescence, centers on the immune system. Am I right?
Centered even more precisely on macrophages. The inflammaging, as determined by Claudio Franceschi, is macrophage-centered. It means that macrophages are everywhere in our organism, in every tissues, and this is one of the bricks that will construct our system. And as they are everywhere, they can be a sort of sensors of what's going on in our body. And it can sense everything that comes from outside. It can be the viruses, it can be the bacteria, it can be fungi. So it can be everything which comes from external, and it can be also a sort of integrative cells from everything which comes from inside. So everything what he called the garb aging, that everything that in the cells metabolically or inflammatory are degraded, like for example the DNA from mitochondria, can be also sensed by the body as an aggression. So the macrophages are able to react by many ways of everything which comes from outside or everything which comes from inside. And in this way, they respond by what we call inflammation, which can be called with aging, the inflammaging, by producing many pro-inflammatory. But we should also stress not only inflammatory, but anti-inflammatory molecules, which will somehow control the inflammation. And this is one of the central theory of this, that this inflammaging is a sort of anti-aging phenomenon, which is not the anti-aging medicine phenomenon, but it's an anti-aging phenomenon to maintain the organism at a completely functional level.
Yeah, so the objective is to maintain homeostasis and to function the best way possible, right? Through adaptation. And it's interesting, this concept that aging is not the same as being sick. It's just a natural process. And if you conduct that process within the boundaries of a good adaptation, probably your aging process is going to be more benign as compared to a maladaptive response, I guess, right?
So, this is very important to consider, that many biogerontologists and many also medical staff consider aging as a disease. And the aim of their research and the aim of their interventions, like the anti-aging medicine, is to cure aging. So I think this is a complete misunderstanding of what is aging. Aging is not a disease. Disease, as most of the medical doctors and medical staff knows, this is something, it's an entity which can be defined in several ways, either by the symptomatology, either by the underlying mechanism, or either by the treatment that we can apply. But aging is so heterogeneous from one person to the other that it cannot be considered as something which can be categorized in one way or to the other. And also we should really mention that the conceptualization of aging as a disease is a very detrimental concept, and join the concept of ageism. ageism, which means that you are aged, you are ill, so we should cure you. So we should really, and the perspective of aging becomes an ill perspective because you will be in any case ill. You can't do too much on that. So, but we can't cure you really. Perhaps we can fix up some things, but you will be. And also we should mention that not all older subjects will have chronic diseases. And this is also a misconception that aging process per se and inflammaging also and the immune changes will lead and are the major cause of the age-related chronic diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular diseases, which is also a complete misconception.
Yeah, it's kind of a unifactorial approach to aging. Just consider it one way, and as you mentioned, this misconception unfortunately leads to unnecessary interventions or the wrong interventions. And I want to move on to the immune system again. You mentioned the macrophage as central, and here I think the macrophage can be seen as a cell that is kind of in the middle for the transition between innate immunity and adaptive immunity. So I want to ask you, what is the role of each one of these two immunities in the process of aging?
This is an interesting question also. So we have the innate immunity, and the innate immunity was considered for a long time that not change with aging. And more our understanding evolved, we know that the innate immune system is changing with aging. But also, perhaps 20 years ago, the Natai has conceptualized what we call the innate immune memory or the trained innate memory, which means that for a long time we were thinking that the innate immune system cannot have any memory. And what was found when we looked to the functioning of the innate immune system, that in older subjects, the innate immune system was activated, which means that even at the basic level, these older subjects produced more pro-inflammatory molecules, like in the inflammaging concept, more free radicals were more active. And this is because considering the immunobiography concept, they were always stimulated, and at each step of stimulation, they remembered by the epigenetic and metabolic changes inside of these cells to be remembered of what went before. And when they get a completely different challenge by this memory, they can act much more efficiently than they could do. So for a long time, the adaptive, innate immune system is working much efficiently than we were thinking in older subjects. But the corollary of that, if they cross a sort of threshold, this can paralyze these cells. So that's why most of the literature that you read on the innate immune system with aging, that they say that they don't function well for phagocytosis, for free radical production, for chemotaxis, for whatever you mentioned. Everything is just lost with aging, which is not true. And also what is very important, that the activation of the innate immune system will drive the adaptive immune system. So if you don't have a correct activation of the innate immune system, you don't have a correct functioning of the adaptive immune system. And this was lately much more important when we consider the COVID-19 and also the vaccination, but perhaps we can come back later on that. And one other aspect which was very the most important in the immunity of aging is the changes in the adaptive immune system. And the most important changes were the decrease in the naive T cells, mostly in the CD8 compartment. And in the meantime, as the naive T cells are decreasing, there are an increase in memory T cells, which already encountered all the antigens, and they are just remaining in the circulation and sometimes can be either senescent or exhausted. So this is the main characteristic that you will find always in each paper, that the naive T cells are decreasing with aging and the memory exhausted or senescent T cells are increasing.
Yeah, and you mentioned something in that regard that caught my attention, and is the metabolic change that happens in the T cells, where they have to switch between oxidative phosphorylation to glycolysis. This is something that is affected. This switch is affected during aging, right?
Yes, and this is very important not only for the functioning, but we know that is also very important for the differentiation of the naive T cells, either to effector memory, central memory, or TEMRA T cells. So the immune metabolism and the changes of this metabolism is another layer that we have in aging, which can impact the functioning of the T cells.
I see. So we have the picture that is it goes beyond the adaptive immunity to include also the innate immunity, and the interplay between the two is what definitely leads to the adaptation to the different stressors that we have during our lives. Let's talk about other aspects that are important here. One of them is uh, the amount of stress. So, not all the stressors are equally intense, and not all the responses that we as hosts, not all the responses that we develop are as strong. So, what is the relationship between the stressors and the response, and what is the connection between that response and the adaptation? So, at what point your adaptive response becomes maladaptive? So, what is the explanation to move along that continuum?
You know, all our life is a stress. So, of course, stress are very different and comes from what we call and say defined as a good stress or as a bad stress. And also the quantity and the strength of the stress is very important. So the concept of hormesis means that when you have all the time small stresses and you can adapt to all these stresses, at each time you are stronger than before. And when you get to a time when you get a huge stress, you have been so much trained that the stress cannot destroy you. But if in your organism, for example, you have a huge and massive infection, like, for example, we have for the SARS-CoV-2, of course, you are not prepared to this stress because you never met this stress. You can have a really maladaptive response, like we had this cytokine storm. But this is also very important because they told very much that during the COVID-19, most of the elderly was affected, most of the elderly died and everything, which is true in some way. But if you look from where these older subjects came, these are mainly from nursing home, mainly people who were heavily impacted by comorbidities. So they have already what we call a higher degree of inflammaging. So this inflammaging, which overwhelmed their body with another stress which comes from another infection, could be SARS-CoV-2, could be an infarction, could be influenza, or whatever the stress, they couldn't respond adequately. So this was a completely maladaptive stress, a maladaptive response, so the person could die. So this means that stress is very important. When it comes, how it comes, what is the strength of this stress, and what is the basic status of your body, and this will determine how you can react to these stresses.
Very, very interesting. So the quality of the interaction between the stressor and the host determines the adaptation,
Yes.
and there is a threshold probably, and if you go beyond that threshold, then you enter the area of being maladaptive, and that's interesting. There are other concepts that I want to clarify here. You mentioned the role of the microbiome. So the host is not fighting by themselves, but the microbiome is integrated somehow, right? So what is the role of the microbiome in this adaptive response?
So what is interesting that microbiome is nowadays for aging is considered somehow a bad thing, because this is part of the new inflammaging fueling. Because before it was just macrophage centered, as was defined by Professor Franceschi, but nowadays we know that senescent T cells and the senescence associated secretory phenotype and the microbiome can be also considered as the fuel for inflammaging. And microbiome is a very important regulator of our immune system. It can be really very inflammatory, but it can be also very anti-inflammatory. And the balance between the good or the bad microbiome that we have in our intestine or in our mouth or whatever, this can determine how your inflammation degree will be in your organism. And we know, for example, that the centenarians possess really so much diversity in their microbiome that it resembles almost to what young people at the 20s can have. And this is very much influenced by your diet. And that's why, most of the people consider the Mediterranean diet as one of the best modulator of inflammaging and immunosenescence, which can keep your immune system as young as possible and as efficient as possible, because it will favor the good bacteria, which will produce most of the ketone body, most of the anti-inflammatory substances, and this can really influence your immune system, either innate or adaptive system.
So this diversity of the microbiome is associated with good longevity.
Yes.
Is this the consequence of that, or is the cause, or is just an association?
I think we can consider it mostly as a cause.
Okay,
I think
excellent.
that, and this is very difficult sometimes to determine what is the cause, the consequence, or as you mentioned, an association. But I think that you should, and the blue zones. The blue zones are the part of the world where most of the centenarians are living. And their way of living, their way of eating, their way of exercising, the way they handle life is very different from some other part of the world. So it's not a consequence. I think that it is something which contributes. If it's not a direct cause, it's a very important contributor to how your longevity will be.
Yeah, definitely. And the microbiome is also involved in the immunomodulation, right?
Oh,
Considering that
yes.
the majority of the immune system is in close proximity to the microbiome, and this is very interesting. So we have talked about the
Just
senescent.
to tell you that
Mhm.
some people consider that if you can make a sort of fecal transplantation, you can rejuvenate your microbiome and also yourself.
Yeah, that is true. Even and the evidence is very clear from even animal models and in humans. You are
Yeah.
absolutely correct, and it's really intriguing. So we have talked about senescent cells, also the microbiome, the innate, and also the other types of immunity. What about the mitochondria? What is the role of the mitochondria in this process of aging?
Mitochondria is one of the most important uh, organelle inside of the cells for the metabolism. But beside the metabolism, which is very important, they can control also the antiviral metabolism of the cells by producing a lot of substances which are directly influencing how the cells can handle a viral infection. The mitochondria are also important in what we call apoptosis. So it can really participate in the programmed cell death. They are also important in what we call the pyroptosis and also the production of the IL-1 and other very important pro-inflammatory cytokines. So the mitochondria are really a very uh, versatile and very multifunctional organelles inside of our cells. And also very important that the mitochondrial DNA can be an important uh, uh, pro-inflammatory source inside of the cells because the TLR9 3 can sense inside of the organism the mitochondria DNA, which is freed from the destruction of mitochondria, and this can initiate the whole inflammatory response inside of the organism, leading to the activation of the IRF3 and also the NF-kappa B. So mitochondria is very important for the inflammaging process.
Yeah, so there is, to certain extent, this the senescent cells and mitochondria that is not working properly is kind of an internal source of inflammation in the end, right?
Yes, but senescent cells are very interesting concept. You know, nowadays, one of the most important uh, way of thinking to fix aging are senolytics and xenomorphics. This is based on the idea that in mice, you can eliminate all the senescent cells, which will rejuvenate the mice. However, I think, and unfortunately, I don't think as the others, that senescence for me is not so important as many people would like to say. Senescent cells can be important, and senescent cells has a very important physiological function inside of the cell of the body. They are anti-tumoral mechanism because all the senescent cells will never transform in cancer. So this is absolutely a normal physiological phenomenon. We need the senescent cells for wound healing, for many healing of our skin. And many other physiological functions are related to senescent cells. So in aging, actually, and mainly in the immune system, we don't know whether most of the cells that we consider senescent are senescent or they are really exhausted. And if you look some paper going back 20 years ago, as you mentioned already, that some papers are forgotten, that Franceschi and colleagues published that in after 85 years, the incidence of cancer is decreasing. And in most of the centenarians, there are very, very few cancer. And one of the things that they have seen that the senescent cells that they considered as one of the marker of the loss of CD28, these cells were not really senescent, but can be a completely different class because they express some innate immune properties, and they are very efficient to eradicate the cancer cells. So we don't know to what extent senescent cells are really bad or adaptive, and to how much extent we can eliminate them for being more healthy or being more young. So, this is a very interesting question, and everybody is now considering senescent cells as only bad.
Yeah, and what you mentioned actually underlines the big message that aging is not a disease. So in the process, there are some things that were probably considered bad, but in reality, they are just part of the process and are actually protective in some instances, like the senescent cells, as you just mentioned. And I think that that the paper in its core, and I actually love this about the paper, is the conceptualization of aging. This is what needs to be like put into focus again, right? So my final question to you is, what is the takeaway from this paper? The message that you want our audience to really think about.
I would like to think that aging is not a detrimental phenomenon. Aging as an adaptation, a lifelong adaptation, started really very, very early in life. And we can call it aging or the passage of time or adaptation or immunoadaptation or envirobiography or whatever we want. But with the passage of time, our body is trained to adapt at each second, each minute, each hour, and each years to what's going on. And this adaptation gives us the opportunity to live long because our life expectation is longer as it was. Our maximal life expectancy doesn't change too much because it remains 120 years. But this is a basic phenomenon. So aging is a positive thing, and aging brings you to somewhere that you were never before. But of course, this can be maladaptive. So everything what we can say, a lot of a good thing can be a bad thing. If you are eating too much sweet that you like, it can be a bad thing. If you are really abusing of your organism, even if it's good, it can be a bad thing. And that the adaptation has its limits. And once we got to a threshold, we are not adapting, we are just destructing. And this paralyzes your way of acting, and this paralyzes your way of immunity, and finally it leads to death. But nevertheless, aging is not a march toward death. Death is just the end of something which cannot be modulated more. But whole your life and whole your biological phenomenon are adaptation, and disease is not part of this adaptation. Disease is a maladaptation. So we cannot consider that if we understand, if we cure all what we think aging mechanisms, that we can cure all the diseases, because this is not leading to disease, aging, but the maladaptation of aging is leading to disease. So this means that we can intervene, we can slow down, we can really reinforce our adaptation. So this is not a negative. This is a very positive concept of aging. I don't know whether I can really convey what I would like to say and how I see aging. But this is essentially how I see aging. But this can be only my view, and I am trying to always say that we can conceptualize differently if you want. But nevertheless, if we are taking aging in this way, we are much more helpful for older subjects, also as a medical doctor, to intervene in the way to really always increase the adaptation and the positive aspect of aging, and not only their resilience and their really the basically building on their reserves, and not only emphasizing what goes wrong with aging.
Yeah, this is a very important message, and I think is a complete shift in paradigm, but it's necessary because as we conceptualize aging in this positive form as an adaptation process, research can focus on those aspects to try to leverage on the modulatory aspects of aging to make it play in favor of the patient rather than chasing the aging as if it was one more disease. And that is absolutely clear, and I agree with you. And I think I learned a lot out of this conversation, and
Thank you.
share, having you sharing your wisdom with us is invaluable. I appreciate you being with us here today, Dr. Fulop, and we are going to keep an eye on your research, and hopefully in the future we can meet again to discuss what has come next in your work. Thank you
I
so
hope.
much.
Thank you very much. It was very kind, and I appreciate very much your openness to understand and to hear something else than just the normal and politically correct way of thinking on aging. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Dr. Fulop. And for our audience, the link to the paper can be found in the description of the video. And never forget to leave us your feedback and to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much, and see you in the next episode.